Chapter 53, The Offerings, Hanyu's POV. Hanyu cried until he thought he must be out of tears, drank several cups of water, and cried some more. His eyes burned and his head felt thick and somehow soggy, but he just couldn't stop. He wasn't a person who got into fights. He wasn't someone who lost his temper and yelled. That wasn't him. He hurt people's feelings, but it was always by accident. He wasn't the sort of person who purposely threw out the most hurtful thing he could think of just because he was angry. Not until today. He'd known he was capable of thoughtlessness, but deliberate cruelty? That was new. I don't want to be a person who does that. No matter how angry he got, he never again wanted to see somebody look at him the way Antony had. The shock, the naked anguish, then the struggle to conceal it. It had been horrible. I'll be better. I won't ever do it again. Where had that thick, choking rage even come from? Something about hearing Antony in particular, speak ill of Asao had been unbearable. Even now, the memory sent a hot spike of anger through his misery. Now that he was a little calmer, he had to admit that Antony had probably been right. The simplest, most logical explanation was that Asao had been the one to tell Lord Marcus about what had happened. But that did nothing to quell his irritation at the thought of Antony, of all people, saying it. Why was it so awful that it was Antony? He didn't think he would have been nearly so angry if Kenta, or Bunta, or even Lord Theodora had said it. But because it was Antony, Hanyu had flown into a rage. A terrible, destructive rage. Even if there had been no basis for Antony's accusation against Asao, Hanyu knew beyond any doubt that he should never have said what he did to the god. He'd suspected, ever since Lord Marcus had told him about the humans his master had bedded and killed, that their deaths had been accidents. Furthermore, given Antony's reaction to his little swoon, he'd been able to guess that the accidents had been traumatic for the god. After the way Antony had trembled against him when he tried to drink, how could Hanyu have used that knowledge as a weapon? I was so cruel. He's forgiven me for everything I've done wrong, and the minute I was angry with him, I wanted to hurt him. At least he knew now about this dark, hard place within him. Now he would be prepared to stop himself if he got that livid again someday. He had never been good at controlling his words, but he would learn to be better when he was angry. He didn't want to be that spiteful like that ever again. He paced the rooms and barely registered the passage of time. When he heard a knock at the door, he flew to answer it, even though he knew that Antony wouldn't have knocked. It was Eiji, standing there with a supper tray. The beautiful man's eyes widened when he saw the state Hanyu was in. "Are you all right?" Eiji ventured. It was so kind of him to ask, after all of Hanyu's thoughtlessness, that Hanyu lunged forward and threw his arms around Eiji. The other man stiffened, then relaxed and gave his back a few awkward pats. It was exactly the way Antony reacted to hugs, and it set Hanyu off crying again. "Oh dear!" Even that sounded like Antony. "Did something happen?" Hanyu's voice came out as a wail. "I did something awful, and I know how to apologize for disobeying, but not for being mean." "Why is it always apologies around here lately?" Eiji muttered. "Do you want me to find one of your friends, or—" His sentence trailed off helplessly. Hanyu pried himself off the other man, wincing a little at the wet spot he'd left on his shoulder, and looked up at Eiji's face. He looked uncomfortable, almost panicked. "Sorry," Hanyu whispered, and Eiji shook his head. No, I wish I could help, but I'm not very good with people. I don't really know how to be comforting. Should I try to find someone else for you?" "It's fine. You were just trying to work, and I grabbed you and cried all over you, and, well, I guess that's the end of any chance I had of impressing you." Eiji blinked. "You wanted to impress me?" Hanyu shrugged and looked at the floor. "Well, yes. I always worry that he wishes he had you back instead of being stuck with me. Now I'm sure he does, because not only am I a bad offering, but I was just an asshole today, and you would never do something like that. You're perfect." "You think I'm perfect?" The naked astonishment in Eiji's voice drew Hanyu's gaze back up. He and Eiji stared at each other for a moment, then Eiji burst out laughing. It was a surprising laugh, so high it was almost shrill, and the older man clapped a hand over his mouth as if he could contain it that way. Sorry, Edgy wheezed. It's just, if only you knew. I'm the furthest thing from perfect, Hanyu. I never earned Lord Antony's notice the way you have, and since leaving his service, I've broken my new master's heart. Even now, I'm trying to figure out how to escape Lord Antony's plans to apologize to me, and wondering whether throwing myself off the ship might work. I'm such a mess. You don't want him to apologize? Edgy gave a little shudder. Gods, no. It sounds like torture to sit there while a god makes apologies I don't deserve. On the other hand, I think my lord might drag him in by his collar if I don't let him track me down before too long, so I suppose I should just accept my fate. Lord Felix must care about you a lot, Hanyu marveled. I think he does. Edgy sounded just as awestruck. I've been lucky, and Lord Antony cares a great deal about you too, Hanyu. I heard what he told my master a few days ago. He wants to be good to you. He is good to me. Hanyu's aching eyes filled again. And I was horrible anyways. Well, I think he cares about you too much to give up on you after one mistake. You should talk to him. Edgy laughed suddenly. I'm starting to sound like my lord, telling everyone to talk like it'll solve everything, but you really should. Hanyu nodded. All right. Thank you, Edgy. It's no trouble. The other man glanced at his feet and flushed. Anyhow, I need to get going. Everyone's food will be cold. You're amazing, Hanyu said fervently. I really mean it. Thank you. Edgy's blush deepened. You said that already. Goodbye now. You should eat your food. It was so much like what Antony would say, though more politely worded, that Hanyu had to bite back a slightly hysterical giggle of his own as he waved goodbye. He felt a little better after Edgy's visit. He stopped pacing, ate heartily, so much crying was exhausting, and fell into bed shortly thereafter. Now that the sun was down, Antony probably wasn't coming back until morning. Hanyu would be able to manage the necessary conversation much better if he'd rested. Should he dress up tomorrow in anticipation of the god's arrival or not? His inclination was to put on his most beautiful robe and his finest jewels, but then that was hardly the humble note that a person was supposed to strike for in an apology. A month ago, he would have beautified himself as much as he could in the hopes that it would incline his master to mercy. Now, mercy felt like a given. Perhaps that was a foolish surfeit of confidence, but Hanyu genuinely didn't think Antony would do him lasting harm for this or any transgression. Hanyu didn't need to strategize the best way to survive the encounter, so he could focus on actually apologizing instead of trying to manipulate the god out of his anger. He drifted off to sleep, still planning what he would say when Antony returned. He was exhausted from tears and emotions, and though he heard the door open and staggering steps crossing the sitting room, he didn't really wake up. Not until morning, when he woke to find Antony, still wearing his rumpled day clothes and braid, curled in a tight ball on Hanyu's long-abandoned cot. His gasp woke the god, who opened his eyes and looked up at him with an expression that Hanyu didn't know how to read. It wasn't the anger he'd expected, nor even annoyance. Instead, Antony just looked resigned. I'm ready to hear whatever you need to say, the god told him. Go ahead, be as harsh as you like. You won't get in trouble. Hanyu slid out of the bed and dragged Antony into his arms. It wasn't how he'd planned to make his apologies, but he'd been expecting anger. He hadn't expected Antony to offer himself as a recipient for Hanyu's anger, and the sight of that flat acceptance made a hug seem like a much better option than groveling. Words poured out of Hanyu as he buried his face in Antony's hair. I'm so sorry. It was an awful thing to say, and I can't believe I was so mean, but I swear I'll never do it again. You've been wonderful to me, and never said anything so cruel no matter what I did. You really should punish me for this, and I hope you do, so you'll know I'm not apologizing because I'm scared of that. I'm just so sorry, and gods, it was awful. You didn't deserve that, especially not from me. Antony sat quietly through the barrage. He stayed stiff in Hanyu's arms, but made no move to pull away. Hanyu knew he ought to take the hint and release his god, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. Even the thought of letting Antony go made him squeeze all the tighter. Aren't you still angry I said that about Asao? He was, but it was a strange reaction that he could think of no good reason for. I know you were right. He was the one who told Lord Marcus. I'll be more careful what I say to him. There was another long moment of silence. Hanyu stared down at the top of Antony's head. He glimpsed something dark on part of the god's scalp, but he couldn't make it out through the silver hairs. What about the rest? It might have been a question, but Antony didn't say it that way. The things I did. I understand if you hate me for that. I could never hate you. I'm sure it was an accident, and I know you feel awful about it, and I never should have used it to hurt you. That was the nastiest thing I've ever done, and I still can't quite believe it really happened. Finally, there was a bit of movement from the god. Antony's shoulders shook, and after a panicky second, Hanyu realized that he was laughing. It was low and bitter, different from the sweet, gasping laugh Hanyu loved to hear so much, but anything was better than the frozen stillness. That's the worst thing you've ever done in your entire life? Oh, Hanyu, no wonder you sleep so soundly. It was cruel, Hanyu argued, and Antony pulled away from his embrace. Hanyu startled a little when he saw how flat and lifeless the god's face was. He didn't even seem to see Hanyu when their eyes met. If you're going to be cruel to someone, I'm a good choice, Antony said. As you now know, I heartily deserve whatever you feel the need to say to me. Something was different about him today. It wasn't his voice or his slow movements so much as his face. Yes, his usual expression was a scowl, but there were 100 details and variation within that scowl that Hanyu had spent the last 2 months learning to read. There was nothing to read on his smooth, calm face now. He looked dead. Fear crawled down Hanyu's spine and started tying tight knots in his belly. What had happened to his cranky, prickly master? Who was this doll? Had Hanyu done this with his careless words? If you don't have anything else to say right now, Antony said, interrupting his panicky thoughts, I would like to visit Theodora and eat. Yes, my lord, Hanyu whispered. It was the best course of action imaginable. Surely Lord Theodora would know what to do. When Antony rolled off the cot and padded to the washroom, his steps were uneven, and when Hanyu turned to look at the abandoned blanket, he saw that it was streaked with the unmistakable russet of dried blood.